Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and this is my final review for Sony Bend's recently released PS4 exclusive, Days Gone. Days Gone is an open-world action-adventure game set in the rural mountainside of Oregon after a devastating viral outbreak turns the country's inhabitants into zombie-like creatures called freaks. Players will need to explore dense forests, abandoned towns, and campgrounds as they search for a new reason to go on living in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. While not the most original concept, Days Gone offers one of the better single-player zombie experiences out there, with a focus on upgrading and maintaining a motorcycle, using zombies as a tool to defeat human enemies, and an excellent story presentation. But unfortunately, the game does appear to be a bit too ambitious, with its open world feeling a bit repetitive, combat not feeling as responsive as similar games, and some significant technical problems. But before we talk about those issues, let's start by talking about the story. In Days Gone, you take on the role of a biker bounty hunter named Deacon St. John. After an initial prologue sequence that helps to explain a past tragedy, Deacon is broken and finds himself drifting from settlement to settlement, taking on bounty hunting assignments and investigations to make a living alongside his friend Boozer. Deacon is a great character, and his voice actor, Sam Witwer, did an excellent job with his performance. I love all the muttering Deacon does throughout the game, giving us a better idea of how he feels about various events and conversations with other characters. At some points it can feel like a bit much, but it's believable nonetheless. It's difficult to really talk about what happens with Deacon and the various people he meets along the way without spoiling anything important. But I will say that as far as zombie open-world video games go, Days Gone has one of the more engaging and interesting plots out there. Sure, it's not at the master-crafted level of quality of The Last of Us, but I'd say it's on par with most of Sony's other first-party properties. As far as the length goes, Days Gone will take a decent amount of time to play through, even when ignoring optional side missions and random exploration. There's a lot of back and forth with the story missions, but even cutting out travel time, there's a lot of narrative in this experience to enjoy. Next, let's talk about the gameplay experience, starting with the open world environment. Days Gone is set in a beautiful rural mountain county in Oregon. There are vast, dense forests, small mountain towns, and old industrial complexes to explore, all with randomly generated threats to keep second visits interesting. I found myself returning to certain areas frequently on my way to and from mission start points, and was surprised to find different enemy types along the way, like bandits driving around on motorcycles, zombie hordes roaming the streets, or even dangerous wildlife like bears and wolves. It feels noticeably alive, and really helps to break up the repetitive nature of the mission structure itself. Most of the game involves you accepting missions at a safe zone and then needing to travel halfway across the map to fetch something. Objectives generally range from killing a key target, wiping out a bunch of zombies, or following clues Witcher 3 style until you find out what happened to a survivor. Both main missions and side missions feel repetitive and monotonous, and after getting to the second and third large open world area, it had become clear that the missions were never going to get much more interesting. The only indication that you're even playing a main story mission is that they're generally bookended by high-quality cinematic cutscenes, as opposed to the poorly animated in-engine dialogue sequences. This isn't necessarily always the case though. The story really seems to gain a second wind about halfway through, as missions become more involved and you start to get a better grasp on what role the other characters are actually playing. But it does take a while to really get started. Days Gone's saving grace is the quality of its open-world activities. I felt thoroughly immersed in the world as I drove down the roads on my custom bike, searched some random abandoned houses for supplies, and hunted down bounties. The world is filled with these types of activities, and you're free to complete them whenever you want. Capturing hostile encampments requires that you dispatch all the enemy bandits or rippers in the area, and there's often a secret hatch hidden around nearby that will unlock access to a new fast travel point. There are also Nero checkpoints scattered around the world, which offer a nice break from the non-stop combat and stealth. Nero checkpoints are typically locked by a nearby generator and will require a bit of simple puzzle solving to power on. While not the most challenging puzzles, the added risk of nearby freakers makes these areas a bit more interesting, and the added benefit of an additional fast travel point makes it worth the extra effort. Not only that, but Nero checkpoints also offer a rare, permanent increase to either your health, stamina, or focus, all of which are incredibly important when facing against more challenging enemies. Zombie nests can often be found in the more suburban environments and are defended by several roaming freakers. When you stumble across a freaker nest, you can throw a Molotov to permanently destroy it, but will need to contend with angry freakers that will rush your location. In addition to zombie nests, there are the game's signature hordes. These hordes are absolutely gigantic and can be found in set locations around the map depending on the time of day. During the daytime, the freakers and their associated hordes hide in dark caves and structures, but at night, the Hordes begin to travel around the environment, often finishing their route at large mass grave sites to feed. These frequent migrations result in plenty of gut-wrenching surprises as you traverse the world. I occasionally found myself sneaking around trying to explore, but would mistakenly turn the corner into a huge horde, much like Rick Grimes in that first episode of The Walking Dead. It's an awesome feature, and easily one of the best features in the game. Trying to defeat these hordes will require a great deal of skill and knowledge of the game's many mechanics, as each of the 500-some zombies will take roughly 2 to 3 shots with a standard weapon to take down, and all it takes is 1 or 2 zombies to get in close to take you down. I frequently would burn through all my ammunition and would need to resort to more creative tactics, like luring the horde towards explosive environmental props, or blocking their path with environmental traps. Defeating these hordes will remove them entirely from the map and award you with some extra XP towards a nearby community, though I'm not sure if there's a way to reset these hordes later to attempt different techniques. Still, the hordes and all the other open world activities function great. Days Gone doesn't rely on gimmicky open world activities like race events or repetitive survival sequences, but instead gives us activities that feel organic to the experience. The game never forces you to complete activities to progress the story either, but rather provides the incentive to explore the world in order to make the game's missions more tolerable. For example, if you're struggling with infiltrating an enemy camp because there's too many random zombies giving your position away, you can try to clear out nearby freaker nests to reduce the spawn rates of those types of enemies. If you're finding that commutes to and from objectives are taking too much time, you can unlock narrow checkpoints and other fast travel locations. While the main missions and side missions are perfect examples of what not to do when designing an open world, the unstructured activities in Days Gone are a great example of how to make a game world more interesting and immersive. A lot of your game time will be spent driving around on Deacon's personalized motorcycle. This motorcycle at first feels a bit loose and unresponsive, but you can apply several upgrades through various settlement mechanics to greatly improve the handling. It takes a little bit getting used to, but the driving feels great in this game. I love drifting around muddy corners and coasting down inclines to save fuel, and this mixed with the zombie apocalypse setting gives it a unique feel. However, there are a few instances where you need to shoot while driving, and this initiates a weird auto-lock system that deals extra damage when the lock is fully initialized. But thankfully, these sequences are rare. When you run out of fuel, you'll need to manually get off your bike and look around for either red jerry cans, or pull your bike directly up to a gas pump, which apparently still functions fine after 2 years of absolutely zero maintenance. Still, ignoring the obvious plot holes and the seemingly endless supply of fuel in every jerry can, I love the idea of having to monitor your fuel levels. There were several instances where I carelessly drove off without filling up my bike and found myself stranded with a huge horde coming after me. These moments really were some of the more intense moments in my playtime, though I can understand others finding this tedious. When you're not on your bike, you'll most likely be mowing down rippers and freakers with a large variety of firearms and melee weapons. The combat isn't terrible, but it also doesn't feel as polished as I would have liked. The weapons don't feel very effective, the melee system feels awkward, and the artificial intelligence can be inconsistent. Full auto weapons, for example, are practically useless against human enemies unless you tap fire them or are at point blank range. And I found bullets often traveled outside of the indicated crosshair, making it even more difficult to line up headshots. You could unlock player skills that improve this, but it still felt like the crosshairs weren't properly reflecting where my shots were landing, both at long range and especially at close range. Days Gone also has a focus ability that lets you slow down time and pull off critical shots on enemies, but I don't really see the reason why this was added. It seems like this slow motion effect is just being added to games for the sake of having it, but it has no real context or general purpose in a game like this. Though, because of the game's awkward weapon handling, I found that the focus skill was rather useful, and I found myself using it more and more when trying to perform stealthy takedowns. When you've run out of ammunition to use, you'll need to resort to using more melee-focused attacks. By default, Deacon is equipped with a weak boot knife that will require multiple hits to kill a single freaker. But there's plenty of more practical melee weapons in almost every building, many of which can be tweaked to be more durable and powerful. While the melee weapons themselves seem to function fine and deal a fair amount of damage, the enemy hit detection feels very inconsistent. Sometimes you'll roll away and the enemies will miss completely like they should, but other times you'll roll away and an enemy's attack will still register. This can make dealing with groups of enemies difficult to escape, which is often your only choice when dealing with the huge hordes. Now, if you're not a fan of direct confrontation, Days Gone offers plenty of stealth action opportunities. You can easily sneak up behind individual enemies and take them down silently, and then quickly move to some nearby tall vegetation to disappear without a trace. If you're looking for a more non-lethal approach, you can throw various distractions like rocks, which will clearly label which enemy will investigate, making AI manipulation incredibly simple. Though sometimes the AI is a bit too simple. There were times where I was able to easily slip past enemies despite being practically right in front of them, and then other times where enemies just seemed to know exactly where I was despite having never raised an alert. I appreciate there being a heavy focus on stealth elements, especially when considering how ineffective the weapons can be early on. But I wish the stealth mechanics were a bit more refined. Now, let's talk about the game's progression system. Days Gone features some light RPG elements with its weapon, motorcycle, and character skill customization. After completing missions or selling loot, players are rewarded with currency to spend on upgrades for their gear. You can purchase a new weapon, additional ammunition, attachments, and improvements to your motorcycle. Ranking up the trust level of an individual camp will unlock additional weapons or upgrades, with each camp offering different weapon types and benefits. This system works well in maintaining the pace of the game's progression, but I was disappointed by the lack of player choice in the missions between camps. This style of system works best when there's a constant stream of missions for each community in the game world, but Days Gone limits the available missions to maintain its plot progression. You can't complete a mission for Settlement B if you haven't already completed a certain mission for Settlement A. This makes the seemingly open world feel far more linear than it should. Again, the actual story for these missions is interesting enough that I still wanted to play through them all. But I just wish, for the sake of choosing how we progressed, that there were more options for ranking up individual settlement trust levels outside of going through the main plot. You won't gain access to powerful firearms until the later half of the game, meaning dealing with the large hordes is pretty much out of the question, as the level 1 and level 2 weapons just don't offer the damage output to kill enough enemies in time. Outside of the trust level unlocks, there's also the main character skill tree that houses several critical improvements to Deacon's abilities, like increased ammo capacity, improved melee damage, and improved weapon handling. Days Gone's gameplay isn't necessarily the best out of the ever-growing pile of open-world action games out there, but things like the motorcycle maintenance and dealing with the massive hordes of zombies do make for some intense moments that you won't find anywhere else. Yes, there are definitely more polished open-world games out there, but I really enjoyed the open world of Days Gone. It has a simple charm to it, where exploration doesn't feel forced on the player. Sure, you can just go back and forth completing the main story missions, which is plenty interesting by itself just for the sake of hearing what happens to the characters, but building up Deacon's abilities and arsenal and finding clever ways to take down hordes and all the other challenging enemy types is where a lot of the meat of the experience comes from. Finally, let's talk presentation. Days Gone is a gorgeous open world video game. Sony Bend, a studio that hasn't really worked on a major title like this in a long time, has gone above and beyond to deliver an incredible looking experience for the PS4. The forests feel genuinely dense with foliage and swaying trees. The towns all feature unique buildings with fully detailed interiors that feel like they were actually lived in. And the amount of zombies on screen in some instances is incredible. There's an impressive attention to detail in the open world that consistently surprised me, like randomized weather with rain sound effects that actually sounded real for once, and even occasional blizzards that blanketed the game world in an impressive layer of snow, not only causing the characters to leave footprints, but also affecting your bike handling. Unfortunately, it does seem that Sony Bend might have pushed the PS4 a bit too far. Days Gone suffers from a number of technical issues, including frequent texture pop-in and a very unstable frame rate. While generally locked at 30 FPS, the game tends to dip down as low as 10 FPS when driving around the world. My guess is that this is caused by the enemies being spawned into various zones, which can greatly impact the CPU usage, especially with the massive roaming hordes. Thankfully, I didn't run into any major glitches or bugs that affected my actual progression. Everything seemed to function fine, and I never ran into a situation where I was forced to reload a save. Overall, Days Gone is a fine open-world zombie experience. It's not perfect, but it certainly isn't as bad as people would have you believe. The story maintains the same level of quality I've come to expect from Sony's first-party studios, and I loved all the main characters, including Deacon, Boozer, Ricky, Iron Mike, and the antagonists. Of course, it's not quite on the same level of a Naughty Dog game, but that's a high bar to begin with. The game is a lot of fun to play, if you mix in plenty of open-world exploration in between the repetitive nature of the more structured missions. And it's worth spending time unlocking fast travel points and upgrading your character if you want to save yourself time and frustration when dealing with the more challenging endgame areas. The game's combat and stealth mechanics aren't terrible and seem to function better when dealing with the zombies than when dealing with human enemies, but it does improve as you unlock better equipment and skills. And the motorcycle is a great feature that gives the game a unique vibe. Days Gone has some interesting ideas, and it delivers surprisingly one of the best third-person open-world zombie games out there. but those technical problems and weak mission design choices are the biggest things holding it back. But what do you guys think? Are you enjoying Days Gone? Or are there other elements in the game that you wish were different? Let me know in the comment section. Also, don't forget to check out my most recent comparison that details all the changes made to the final game from its original 2016 debut. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.